Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Shoemaker. I am the director of the Rye Free Reading Room, and it is a pleasure to welcome you tonight to the virtual library living room. While we are not gathered together in the library's big meeting room for this program, I think it might help with our discussion tonight for everyone to be in the comfort of their own homes. Hopefully just having watched the outstanding documentary 13th. This program tonight is offered in conjunction with the Rye Historical Society. I'd like to thank Allison Rallier and Sherry Jordan for working with us to make this possible. Our discussion tonight will be built around 13th and the systemic racism that exists in our criminal justice system. If you are interested in this topic, I encourage you to look at ryelibrary.org/anti-racist for reading resources. And we have 4 titles available for you throughout the month of June that are available to download with no waiting at all. Me and White Supremacy, White Fragility, Between the World and Me, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. So those and many more are available through our website. Our presenters tonight are Kristy Leader and Nikki Hines. Kristy has worked for over 20 years as a teacher, school administrator, and college professor in Westchester, New York City, and New Jersey. She has a focus on community activism and social justice, and she currently works with schools and organizations as an anti-bias, anti-racist educator. Nikki Hines is the assistant director of the NYC Center, a community organization in Rockland County. She co-facilitates Working Together for Racial Justice Meetings, is the chair of the NYC Housing Authority Board of Directors, and leads courageous conversations to engage, sustain, and deepen dialogue about race and racism with educators. I'm pleased to have them both with us tonight, and without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to them. Please give them a virtual round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Joanne and Jordan, can I ask you both, since you're here on the panel and we're fortunate to have you as part of this conversation, to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure, I'll start. My name is Joanne Dunn. I'm the executive director of the Youth Shelter Program of Westchester, which is located in Mount Vernon, New York. We'll get to what that is maybe probably later on in the discussion. I won't share that. But I'm glad to be here tonight to bring an angle about the youth shelter and how we play a role in the solution for mass incarceration, and particularly around juvenile justice. I'm glad to be here tonight. I am a Westchester County resident. I live in Peekskill, New York, but work down here in Mount Vernon, New York, and have been doing work throughout the county, particularly hinged on workforce development and also I would say juvenile justice work as well. So glad to be here, and thank you for inviting us.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
Thanks, Joanne. I am Jordan Cormier. I'm actually the program director at the Youth Shelter Program of Westchester. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, as it was the most wonderful impromptu meeting I could ever sign up for, and I'm glad of that. Just because the topic is very much so important to the work that we do every day. And there's so much that we can all come together and figure out how we can create this call to action, because if we don't start making these waves and this movement, we will stay stuck. And I don't think we all need to continue in the vein of having the system as the way that it is. We have to move forward. We have to be able to work with one another. And I think this is a formal time for everyone to become educated, everyone to just really raise their energies up to create some waves and change. So I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. We're so fortunate to be amongst this group of people. So I'm just looking through the chat box, and I see a lot of outrage and sadness, and the film is very eye-opening. I think we all share in that anger. And I think part of the hope of this evening is that the anger doesn't just sit, but it helps us propel forward. and, you know, start to make some real progress. Because, you know, for me, one of the things I was left with this film is that we haven't made too much progress at all. It seems like we just keep going in circles. So I'm very thankful to both Joanne and Jordan that you're both here with your perspective, and that you're looking through the lens of hope, because that's not my immediate feeling after watching this. Before we get into some of the guiding questions that we have, we just wanted to go over some norms. The first part of the norms come out of the book Courageous Conversations. And I think that we're at a time when we have no choice but to start to have courageous conversations. We've been taught from a time that we were very young that talking about race was taboo. It's one of those things that you're told, like, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics, and race is right up there. And I think a big piece of why we struggle with progress is because we're just not able to have these conversations. So this book, Courageous Conversations, I encourage you to read it. It could be maybe a future thing for us all to do, but it really, and Nikki can speak to it at some point also, because she does these courageous conversations in schools, but it really talks about being brave and creating safe, brave spaces where people can work through some of this together. And I hope that this is a safe, brave place for us to be tonight. So just quickly, the norms for those conversations are to speak your truth, to stay engaged, to expect to feel discomfort. And I think that's probably the hardest part, particularly for white people. Unfortunately, you know, Black people are having to have these conversations all the time. I am a mom of 3 kids. My kids are biracial. So being a white person, having walked through the world with that lens, and now raising my kids, I did not grow up talking about race all the time, although it is something that's constantly on the forefront in my house. So for some of us, talking about race can be discomfortable. And I do ask that you sit in that discomfort. If it feels difficult, then you're doing the right thing. Don't try to shy away from it. Sit there, let the discomfort sit in. And I actually heard somebody say, you know, start writing down why you feel uncomfortable, and that may help you kind of focus on how to go forward. Be aware of your intent. So are you saying things just to stir things up, or are you saying things with general question? And own your impact. And that's part of that discomfort. We're going to say things that are uncomfortable for people as we start to talk to each other about race. And, you know, think about your impact with others. You can own it if you're hurting someone's feelings and still keep moving forward. Be a listener and a learner always. None of us here are experts on anything. I don't think you can ever be in this realm. It's always about learning more and moving forward. And accept and expect non-closure. And I think for a lot of us, that's a really hard one. We're not going to walk away here with the solutions today. Hopefully we'll walk away with some ideas and some hope. And it's the beginning and not the end. So don't expect closure. We're not going to be done. This is the start. And just some norms around, you know, this forum, Zoom in particular. We ask that you do stay muted when you're not speaking to cut down on the background noise. I will also. We ask that you keep your camera on if possible. We're not going to be looking at this screen the whole time. We will ask questions and then go to the view where we can see each other. I think we were invited here to have a discussion because this is a discussion. This is not about us talking at you. This is about us making meaningful connections with each other. So we do ask, I know we all, you know, look kind of crazy in our houses and we haven't gotten haircuts and all of that, but if you're able to, please do turn your camera on so that we can connect with you as a human being. And Chris, did you want people to just unmute and speak, or do you want them to raise their hand to share? What works best for you? You're muted. See, I told you.
See, there we go. The Zoom meeting has actually begun. I feel like we'll introduce hands if there's too much overlap.
Okay. So for right now, feel free to unmute and jump in as we get to the discussion pieces. There's also the chat box. I see people are using it, and Chris is going to help us out there too. Maybe Chris, you can help with some of that.
Yeah, I'll watch chat for
questions about cameras and that kind of thing. Any questions about the norms so far? This was a difficult movie. I mean, this is a difficult film to watch. So this is going to be a difficult conversation. And if it's difficult, that means we're doing it right. Right, fellow panelists? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to get to the first question. I'm going to be quiet because I've spoken enough. and I'm going to move myself here on the side because I can't even read the question. So how did the film shape your understanding of the criminal justice system? Did any facts from the film surprise or shock you? What information was new? And what facts challenged your pre-existing ideas? So think about that for a moment, and I'm going to, in just a second after you read the question, I'm going to transfer us to a, so that we can see each other. But you know, really think about, was there anything that shocked you? Like what changed about your understanding of the criminal justice system? Was there anything upsetting? Was there anything new that you learned? So for a moment, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to mute.
So I think I'm going to be the first to talk about it because it was the first time that I watched the 13th and really didn't go into what the 13th Amendment was, right? So it was really trauma triggering for me to see all the things. And I think that, you know, to see the history of how the prison was created, on how jail was created and who it was created for, and it brings into today, right? So if you look, the 13th Amendment says that all people are free unless you're a criminal, and how they formed and put who the criminals were and how that puts it into today on how people look at Black and brown people, particularly Black men, and how they, you know, see Black men as animals. And, you know, seeing all those things, it was really, really trauma triggering for me, made me very, very angry, and, you know, just made me want to jump right on into doing a whole lot of things. And then another thing that really, that I did not know was all of the companies that were intact with the prison system, like Aramark, for example, was one of the places. And as I think, and I was looking at that, and I had to keep going back. I had to keep pausing it and going back, and like, did I really just see Aramark? And that's one of the companies here in Rockland County, and I'm not sure if, you know, it's in Rye as well, but that's one of the companies that serves our children food. So that says a lot to me. And a lot of our children that get that breakfast and lunch are Black and brown children. So it all just like put it into perspective, and me also thinking of how school systems are and how they're designed to look and how they're designed for Black and brown children, right? So the system was created to do exactly what it was set up to do. So, you know, that for me was like a huge, you know, eye opener, and was very, very trauma triggering. So I'm gonna leave that there and, you know, go to other people that wanna talk about it or answer the question.
I can share. I firmly agree with you in regards to being trauma triggering. It really has the idea of systemic oppression, because we went from one system of slavery to then saying, oh, all men, we are free, we are created equal from, I mean, quite frankly, 4 white men in a room. You know, we know how the Constitution was written and who it was written from. And when we get to that space of saying, well, we're going to take a system of slavery, we're going to abolish that, but we're going to be crafty with our words to then create another system of slavery or indentured servitude. And we're able to say now, oh, we can still capitalize on this because now you're the bad guy. You need to complete this term, and while we're at it, you're still going to do slave labor, and you're still going to work hard for us, and we're still going to build off of the backs of Black and browns for little to nothing. And we're not going to give you any part of, you know, what they say, the 40 acres and a mule. We're not going to provide you any reparations. We're not going to allow you to own your property, because guess what? We're going to continue to break up your family no matter what. We broke up your family bringing you here. We're breaking up your family keeping you in prisons. And the dynamics of Black and brown families and how we all perceive and look at ourselves, it's alarming and it's oppressive. And it adds to the narrative of this is all a money system and it's a money's game. And that alone, it creates a level of frustration, because even for us, that we work in an alternative to incarceration. But why are we here is because we have to interface with our own to provide them support and services, so that way they understand they are not just a number. They are not just this black and brown, because that's predominantly who we run into. You're not just this black and brown young man or even young woman in places in which you don't matter. You do matter, your voice matters, but because we've been dealing with a systemic oppressive system, we're not able to unite in the way that, say, other cultures have been able to. And I know, quite frankly, if we look into even the Holocaust, you look into the Holocaust, there have been many ways in which there have been apologies, there have been even reparations, in a sense, for all those who have dealt with that tragic scene and scenario. But however, we're not looking at a space where our communities are being united and taken out of this oppressive system, and we're only asking for equality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And we're asking to be rehumanized, right? We're asking to be rehumanized because we're not treated like humans, right? And I think of in the film, and they were playing like a lot of, you know, music, and one of the songs was from Common. And, you know, he said in his song, he said, you know, now instead of using the N-word, you're now using, you know, the word criminal, right? So now there's like a new word to form to say for us instead of using the N-word. I thought that was good too. And I thought that, you know, also with the, how it kept going back and forth from, you know, new to old, and how the images were when, you know, there was that one image of when Trump was speaking. I'm probably going way too far, and I'm sorry, but like, it's like,
no, but even with the monster comment. No, you're right. You're on point, Nikki.
Once we started talking, I just was like, I'm mad, because I was telling Kristy the whole time, you know, that it's really trauma triggering, and like thinking about all the things, and you know, that one piece where Trump had his campaign, whatever, you know, and you see the image of one of the white men pushing the black lady in the crowd, and then they went back to, you know, back in, I think it was I forget what year it was, but then you see the white man pushing the black man into it, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, we're going back? Like,
yeah,
you know, and
I think that piece was very powerful, that when they kept going back and forth, and, you know, back to that idea that you think we've made progress, and it was a very powerful way to show that there hasn't been a lot of,
there hasn't, yeah.
You know, for me in particular, one piece that, you know, I felt new and upsetting was, you know, I felt like I was violated by people that I trusted, companies that I trusted, politicians that I thought were okay,
yes.
You know, and I felt like, damn, like I've been asleep at the wheel. Like, these are people that I personally supported. I mean, to hear Hillary Clinton, they're like, you know, they're animals and they should be locked away, and Bill then, you know, yelling about how Hillary was doing the right thing and nobody should be finding fault with it. You know, I felt violated. Like Victoria's Secret, like I'm gonna have to go through all my drawers now because they're literally making underwear off of slave labor. You know, the idea that so much of the economy is built on this slave labor that prisons are using. I mean, you know, I felt violated by people who in my head I thought I knew better. And it really made me feel like I gotta really wake up, particularly now election season is here. I gotta do a better job of waking up about this and really thinking about, you know, the political piece. But I want to open it up too to our participants who are here. I'm so happy to see so many faces. Thank you for turning your cameras on with all our no haircuts. What was surprising for you? What did you learn about the criminal justice system? Or, you know, I see a lot of there was angry. Tell us more about that.
I thought one of the things that many people have brought up was when they segued and showed all of the corporations that supported the prison complex. And you hear that the prison complex, the prison industrial complex, but then when they threw up the companies, it wasn't just companies that were building prisons, it's all the other parts of it. I mean, for instance, the connection they drew with Walmart, just thinking of, you sometimes don't understand how a simple little thing that comes up in a law and the ripple effects, and realize that virtually every time you try and institute a law or a reform, there are companies that are looking for ways to get around it and monetize it. And I think that it just, for some reason, the way that they handled that struck me probably right between the eyes in a way that it has never before.
Yeah. Sherry, and you know what's so interesting about that, Sherry, that you say that, is that not only were these folks doing quote unquote slave labor behind fences, right? Factories behind fences. But the funny thing about this is when these young people, or even when returning citizens come home, they can't even get a job in some of these places. That's the craziest thing that, like, I find it just so bizarre.
I thought that was the other thing that was brought out extremely well, is how the turning everything into a federal crime and then making anybody who's been convicted of a felony unable to vote. I know we fought that out in Florida. They passed it. The Republicans have been trying to stop it, but that's the biggest thing, the way that it's been used. And I don't think probably until, this year, probably this election cycle, probably from 2018, I think people have really started to make that connection of this is the way that you disenfranchise people forever. Is by doing that.
Forever. And when they were saying in some places, like 30% of the population can't vote, it's crazy. It's the people that need to vote the most are, their hands are tied and they're unable to make any change because they actually have no vote. They're actively oppressing people, like actively, not just oppression is happening by accident. They're actively oppressing people, Anybody else have initial thoughts or feelings about the criminal justice system and new information or shocking information?
Can I add something? So first of all, I want to go back to what the other woman with Joanne, what she had said. You brought up a really, really, really good point. And in fact, it really ties in with what I read earlier today in the New York Times about the wage gap for Black men has been the same since 1950. So you ask, all of us should be asking ourselves, okay, why is it, how is this systemic racism so into our society that there has been no recognition and no movement? Because we've had all these other things that have allowed for advancement. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at it and you look at how the system has been rigged right from the very beginning, and Jim Crow laws, and then everything that kind of gets sort of built into our system of work, and how people have just fallen off the face of the earth when it comes to getting counted and heard. And that's something that I think that the documentary is really trying to establish, that they're not off the face of the earth. They're just not being counted, and they are actually part of our society. And we have to look at this systemically, because it really gets to the crux of, that it's within all of our systems. So when we look at figures that show that our economy is doing so well for people, it doesn't include Black people.
It's not true.
Right. So it's just systemic throughout. And so I think your point was so great. Like, why is it that in this sector, why have we had really no movement? And when you see the figures that Black men are getting paid at the same amount that they were getting paid compared to their white, the white men at 61 cents on the dollar, and it hasn't moved since 1950, that the systems, the hooks, the levers, it's all in place right now.
Absolutely. It's shocking and obviously very disturbing. So the next piece is, that we wanted to really give some thought to is, how does the film show us how the media and popular culture represent or misrepresent Black Americans, particularly Black men? And how has this contributed to a dangerous climate of white fear and anxiety? So just give yourself a minute to read. I'll go back to us being able to see each other. But, we wanted to kind of give some thought. I thought also this was a particularly powerful piece, the way the film exposed how, you know, Black men are really represented through media and how that's all part of this system. So
I don't even think, this is Joanne, I don't even think you necessarily even had to watch the film to know how Black men are particularly, or Black Americans, particularly Black men, are portrayed in the community. I mean, just last week we had a town hall with our young people to talk about particular things, and they asked me, like, if I'm wearing a do-rag on my head, why am I categorized as a certain individual? And you didn't have to watch the film to necessarily know that, or to see how folks are being portrayed.
If I could chime in on that. I think when I was watching the documentary, and thank you, by the way, to the Ride Library and the Historical Society for setting this up tonight. I think this is a wonderful event. One of the things I kind of did as I was watching is I was sort of jotting down kind of what I was seeing, categories of things I was seeing. And the documentary kind of wove such a cohesive narrative that I think is such a, in some ways, uniquely American narrative, in that it started with politicians, you know, choosing their given platform, in this case, crime. Then it moved quickly into lobbying. Then it moved quickly into big business. You know, this nexus of politicians and a platform and lobbying and business. You know, we see that in so many different, with so many different topics. And then kind of turning it into, you know, the labor, this forced labor that we continue to see. You know, with the people that are in prison. And then, you know, the overarching sentiment I kept seeing in the pictures and the point on media was just the violence, you know, the singular violence kind of over and over again. And, you know, I just thought that it really was such a kind of a powerful narrative that I hadn't seen sort of portrayed in that way. And I think the media and the portrayal of Black men in particular in the media is such a critical piece of this whole narrative. And it's kind of all of those things together, you know, the politicians, the lobbying, big business, the media. And it seems to me the only way to change any of this is really through policy. And someone made the point about, you know, the importance of voting and being denied the vote. You know, voting for those individuals who prioritize these kinds of issues, because without the change in policies, you know, we've seen what the intended or unintended consequences have been. So, thank you.
You know, one thing I found particularly upsetting and shocking was that initial movie that they were saying was so changing the black and white film. Does anybody remember what the name of the film was? Like, it escapes me.
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation.
And how it was, I mean, planted, right? Like planted that things weren't happening. There was not burning of crosses and these things prior to that. It was planted. And just to connect this back to what's happening today and the idea of, you know, news and media and politicians in particular, and how they use the media to twist the narrative and to perpetuate this. I mean, I think about our current president even, and the idea of using things like bad hombres or the radical left, or, you know, they're not as overt as let me show this awful movie, but it's very carefully planting seeds in the back of your head that this particular population of people is dangerous, that this particular population of people is a danger to you and your family and your home. So while I think we would like to think that we've gotten away from some of that more overt stuff, it's still all the time. And the interesting thing of that newsreel that wasn't happening back in those days is, for us, it's all day long, right? Like, we have CNN and these other news places, media on all day long, so you can literally be hearing it and then you're reading it on social media. And so where does that fit into our ideas? And, how does that impact on a daily basis when that type of language is used very subtly? And they talked a lot about veiled language, how you can't just come out and say certain words, but you can say law and order, wink, wink, and, we all know what that means. But when it's said enough all day long, like, what is that doing to us? And when do
I think, Kristy, you bring up a really good point, and one of the ones that I think the film brings up so brilliantly, and that is that part of the problem when the language stops being overt is that it becomes easier for rational, reasonable people to think when they hear things that what they're hearing seems logical and okay. And when it's overt, rational, reasonable people, those people who I would call sort of the most people that are kind of in the middle between extreme and non, when they hear really overt language, it's very easy for those people in the middle to go, oh my gosh, and not accept what they're hearing as truth. But when it's done in this veiled way, and I think that this is, it's what makes it so difficult in how we're having to live it now, is that because it's less obvious, it's harder for people, unless they're really paying attention and watching and listening and learning about things that are harder to find because they're hidden and quiet, it just passes right by them and they think it's not happening. I include myself in that, but I think that's what's so insidious about it when it isn't overt anymore.
I'd love to chime in right now.
I'm sorry, Nancy, when you're saying that it's hidden, what exactly is hidden?
Yeah.
Because I think that right now, in this day and age, it's not hidden.
I couldn't agree more.
Right, I completely agree. Right.
I think Dan wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, Nikki, that my thoughts were circling to it. I hear you, Nancy, but I feel in this day and age, we've never been more overt.
Of course.
There was a time. I'm not arguing. I'm not contradicting. I'm just saying there was a time with the Clintons and everyone, like, where there was subversion and
quieter, right?
Now it is overt. And there is no excuse.
In your face.
I agree.
There's no issue for any of us to be like, well, you got to dig in. It is there. It is obvious. And there's so many things we have to do. And I just want to go back to a point earlier, just like, we've been reading a lot about these kids in Rye, talking about the education that they've had here and the things they've had to deal with and overcome. And then there was one individual who spoke a contrary point of view on it and said, there are tons of immigrants who had to work their way up in this country, stop complaining. And there's so many things that have to be done and so many things that our family has to do. But like in the education system, they have to start educating. And that is so wrong that our kids were not taught. African-Americans couldn't get loans. They couldn't inherit wealth. There was no inherited wealth. Like, there is a whole history of systemic racism that stopped.
Agreed, Dan.
Every white person could come here and get whatever they want. They could get the American dream. It is a different story. And for any miseducated student to come forth and say, well, they just have to, they don't understand. And it's not an excuse.
Yeah, I don't understand the impressions,
And I could tell you as somebody who works in schools, teachers, and I'm a teacher and I love teachers, so this isn't a dig, it's a cry for help for us and my fellow professionals. We're not equipped, period. It's not something that schools are teaching. It's not conversations that many principals want to have. And so we're ill-equipped as teachers to have any of these conversations. Something that I find,
beyond teachers, Kristy.
I'm sorry?
I said it's beyond teachers. I mean,
speaking specifically to schools, even at the most basic level, like I teach a class about teaching in diverse classrooms. And the first thing teachers say is, I won't talk about race because I'm afraid, I'm scared. And no one is stopping. And where's the support? Like they don't even know where to begin. We live in Nikki and I live in a fairly progressive community. And I can tell you, we'd like to think, right? Nikki, people would like to think. But I could tell you, my son, who's now in 6th grade, when he was in 1st grade, they were dressed up like pilgrims and Indians. And I can tell you that my kids, and who are Black kids walking through the world, and again, for me, I'm seeing the world through different eyes, they're not learning about heroes that look like them. We're starting to introduce curriculum so that there are pieces of Black heritage and American Black history included, but it's also only the devastating pieces. And that to me as a mother is devastating to watch. Like, I want you to learn about the kings and queens that look like you, not just all the hard times. You know what I mean? But there is no conversation, not no, because I know Nikki's doing it in schools, but there's very little conversation. And what I'm seeing is that schools are starting to want to talk about it. And Nikki, I'm sure you can agree because you are having these conversations, but it's for those who sign up to do it. They're not being made to do it. So you're preaching to the choir. You got the same 3 teachers. A lot of times they're teachers of color that are showing up like, sure, I'll do it. And then you have all the rest of the people that are still like, la, 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 right? So at our most basic level, like we can't even get to the adult part if we can't start by talking to our kindergartners about some of the most basic stuff, you know?
But Kristy, you also live in a progressive community, you said. So when you take a somewhat segregated community, that conversation is not even happening with 3 teachers, right? So you take a community that is not even being talked about, you know, Black and brown folks, immigration, you know, things are just not being exposed. And that's why it's essential that it has to cross borders. It has to cross different communities in order for it to be effective. And the conversation is not going to be easy. It's not going to be nice. We're going to shed tears and it's going to make us uncomfortable, but it has to cross to another community, because us talking about it in our silo is not going to help change what needs to happen.
I agree with you. And I think that also, like, as Kristy was talking about our, you know, town being very progressive, now, that's now, it is, right? And it was very hard to have those conversations. And I think the key part in being able to have those conversations with the teachers was to, the kids actually had to tell the superintendent what was going on in the district. And I think that that's important, that the kids understand and know, and the kids were able to be vocal, as scared as they were, but they were able to be vocal about what was happening to them in the school system, along with my help on the side. So the only reason why a conversation was able to be had was because of, you know, the children being able to have that conversation. And I think you're right, Joanne, like it has to be across the board, right? Across the board. It can't just be in like one little community. Like we got to figure out how to make this massive. Like I feel like I need to change the world. I'm like going to come over there to Rye and change it. I'm coming over there to where you are in Westchester, and I want to change it, right? Because I think we all need to have this conversation and everybody needs to do it, you know? And
I hate to talk, you know, about a different topic, but just this morning I was talking about racial inequities in workforce development. And yet there was no one like me that was on the panel. So we can't even have a conversation about racial equity when we don't have people of color at the table. I mean, it's just that critical. Like you can't talk about what we're going to do when when we don't have people represented. While you might empathize with us, Kristy, because you have Black children, you would never walk a mile in a Black man's shoe. Like it just, we can't do that.
It's true. It's true. And this brings me to the next question, which I know is something that Nikki and I have talked about and that Nikki feels very strongly about. So I want to make sure we get it before, Joanne, we turn over to you, because we're almost at where we're supposed to be turning over to you. But
I'm having a good time, so let's keep it going.
All right. The film explored both the work and the danger of the work done by Black leaders such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, and Fred Hampton. What are your thoughts about how Black leadership was in the past and now is today? Hold on, let me move myself.
We did a big sigh back here. We just said,
so did I.
So to me, what strikes me about that list is how many of those people have been killed or incarcerated. I mean, that's pretty shocking. I thought actually Van Jones towards the end of it said something very interesting about the current Black Lives Matter movement, is that it's completely decentralized. You don't have a leader that you can kill off and have and keep taking them out and exile them. And I think it's one of the strengths of the current protest is that there are no messiahs leading the program. And it's very difficult, I think, for forces to push back against.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Sherry. I also think that what's dangerous is not so, I'm sorry, my dog is barking, not so much of, you know, the higher up people able to demolish Black people who are in this movement. I think the dangerous people are the people on the ground, right? That are counter protesting, that think they're woke and do not follow Black leadership. Those are the people that are dangerous, that don't let Black people lead. And when Black people are leading, they want to take away from Black people and not so much steal their shine, but take it away and make their own. So I think those are the most dangerous people. And I think that, you know, as white people, that you need to follow the lead of Black people. And you just stay behind and do your work with your fellow white people. Like that's what I feel that needs to happen. And those people are super duper dangerous. And those are the ones that scare the shit out of me, actually. I'm sorry for the cursing, but I had to do it.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, you, Nikki, to just clarify, you mean the people who try and take the Black Lives Movement and try and take it over and for their sort of their own reasons?
So
I mean,
what I'm saying is an ally, right? Or a co-supporter, or whatever you want to call it. And you can call it an ally, right? So let's call it an ally. So what I'm saying is for an ally to be with you, and the Black person is doing the work and the Black person is doing the leadership, and you have the white person on the side. And people know about that white person, that white ally on the side. And instead of giving that credit, not even necessarily the credit, but showing that the Black person is doing all the work, instead it's flipped. And it's as if the white person did all the work, and then now that Black person is in the back, right?
Okay,
So,
I thought that's what you meant. I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. I agree with you.
Right. So as I was saying, those are the ones that scare the shit out of me.
I'm Maria Imperial, the CEO of the YWCA White Plains in Central Westchester. Welcome to the YWCA's 12th annual Stand Against Racism.
I mean, for me, it was just so impactful to hear and see sort of all in one place. Like, we know all these things, right? Like, we know the people that have been, you know, killed. But I think it was Van Jones that was like, how are we supposed to defend ourselves? He said, how are we supposed to come back when one after the other is killed? And, you know, I think it was particularly profound. And, you know, in speaking to Nikki, I know Nikki talks a lot about, you know, for these kids, I mean, Nikki works with a lot of teens in our community. It's critical for them to see Black leadership. It's critical.
It's critical for positive Black leadership as well.
Yeah.
I think in the Black community, you know, we have these representatives that, you know, for every event that happens, for every tragic event that happens, we know we have Reverend Al Sharpton to show up, to speak out, voice our hurt, our anger, our concerns. But, you know, who else?
Right.
Where we've turned now is to media in which we have rappers and rappers turn activists, that they're utilizing their platform to spread the word and understanding about mass incarceration. For example, you know, Meek Mill, he's working alongside Jay-Z and these bigger partnerships to free a lot of Black and brown men in these communities where they don't have money for bail. And the charges are so small, but they're sitting in there just waiting and waiting. And, you know, when it comes down to it, the way that we've shifted in leadership, because people like the show, you know, it's all about 24/7 access to the media, the rappers, the music, and all that kind of stuff. We now, you know, our leaders, to me, have turned, you know, to pop stars and all this, you know, all of these different arenas that they have that platform, and now they're just utilizing it for the good now. But if we're looking for someone to step up in the way that Martin Luther King did, if we're looking for someone to step up in the way of Malcolm X did, they can only step up if they are deemed non-aggressive. And that's the problem when we're dealing with these issues here, because I'll say, for instance, myself, do you know the reason why I would get called back for interviews? It's not because I didn't have the credentials or whatnot. It is because on paper, my name is Jordan Cormier, and they think I'm a white male when they're calling me. And then when I get on the phone and they're like, oh, wow, she sounds great, let me give her a call back, let me bring her in. And I can tell you, I've walked into interviews and they're like, hi, you know, high-pitched kind of hi, because they were not expecting me. And in what day and age did we say that my look and my voice have to match a particular aspect for you to feel that I'm non-aggressive, for you to feel that I'm okay and I can articulate a conversation? And I know that I have friends of all stages, ages, colors, and all that stuff. And a lot of times we'll get into these instances where they'll say, oh, but you're not like the others, you know, and there's this, you know, portrayal that many have about the Black culture that is deemed ignorant. They're like, oh, you are so articulate. I don't necessarily want to hear that. That's not cool, as they say. Mm-hmm. But when you push forward into stances of leadership, for me, I have to be non-aggressive and non-threatening, even though I can be passionate and on fire. But a white person's passion can be shown, and they can cry, mm-hmm. and you can feel all the emotions. But if I display any of that, then I'm erratic. And if I display any of that, then I'm emotional. There's something wrong with what I'm doing. And when we're looking at leadership in the Black community, we have to keep somebody even keeled at all times. If you show too much, you don't want to be that angry little, Black woman, right? You're deemed angry, aggressive, or whatnot. If you show too much or too little, then the media is slaying you, because they're like, oh, well, so what's wrong with them? I mean, if anyone has had a chance to see Becoming with Michelle Obama, mm-hmm. she was portrayed as this, like, oh my God, she's rolling her eyes and, you know, she's aggressive and all these things. Meanwhile, she's the most articulate person in the bunch, highly credentialed with all of these different attributes. But people base it on color and not on the person. And if you're asking for leaders to step up, mm-hmm. now all we have are the rappers that are really going to do these things, because they're idealized and deemed non-aggressive across both lines. So there's just as many Black and brown that are listening to, you know, Jay-Z that there are white kids, and that's okay. They can idealize and he can voice that. But in reality, for right now, it's alarming that we don't have anyone to step up for fear they will be killed. The fear that Obama was going to be killed in his administration was so high that we now get here, and listen, whether you like him or you don't like him, that's fine. It's your choice. It's not a problem. But I don't think that Trump has that same issue of somebody wanting to assassinate him, and it's so the angst of waiting for it to happen are not the same as I feel like Obama had. So it's really challenging when we're asking for Black mm-hmm. leadership to step up, because it's challenging even to have this conversation.
Oh yeah, it's uncomfortable.
And Jordan, just to your very important point, I think also, you know, we've moved to this other type of assassination. And so if you look at Obama and the way he was talked about and continues to be talked about, mm-hmm. another leader that has emerged in recent years is Colin Kaepernick. They assassinated that man. They killed him for all intents and purposes. Right. He lost his job. Like, they really tried to assassinate him. So while, you know, the protections don't allow for there to necessarily be, you know, a shooter out there, they find ways. And I mean, who wants to step up after we see what happened to Cap? Who's going to say, let me put myself out there, you know? And it's scary, but you know, you make an amazing point there. Joanne, I'm going to turn it over to you, because we want to hear more about the work that you're doing. And
I just wanted to say thank you to Jordan, because you did, you know, it's always good to have those moments where your viewpoint shifts 180 degrees. And thank you, because now I see what you mean by there not being, it's hard to be a leader to step up right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had thought that way. So thank you very much.
Welcome. Yeah. So I'm on. I have to tell you, I'm a very open person. And so I have to tell you, while I definitely tremendously appreciate this conversation, there's so many raw emotions here, right? There's like this spectrum of emotions that I'm feeling like I want to share, but then I'm like, do I hold back? Then I'm like, I'm angry at some point, you know. It's a really tough conversation. And, you know, before you know, all of this happened, you know, I used to, and I'm really sharing with you all because I've had to play a role because of being in a leadership and trying to conform to societal standards. You know, I had to play as an African-American woman. And today I stand proud to say Black. I stand proud to just be in this conversation and let it be clear that we're talking Black and white, you know, and I really commend all of you that we're having this conversation and really being thoughtful about it. And while it's uncomfortable for all of us, because, you know, I think it's a conversation that this is only a tidbit of what needs to continue, right, for the work. I can talk to you all day about what we do here at the youth shelter as an alternative to incarceration program for young people 16 to 21, but it's just not enough, right? It's not enough of what we do. And then secondly, when you think of mass incarceration and systematic racism, we haven't even touched the drivers that have caused us to get here, right? Like Catherine said, Black men are still getting the same wages from 1950. Why is that? That's where we need to stop. That's where we need to have the conversation. Why is that still happening? Those drivers of health inequities, the workforce not being represented in Black and brown communities, why there's a Starbucks in your community and we have a bodega on the corner in other communities, right? Like that's where we need to start and have a conversation. And if you take like a community, and I know Rye a little bit, but if you take a community like particularly Yonkers, you take the south side and the north side, it looks totally different. You take a Mount Vernon that's a border from Pelham, it looks totally different. Why is that? Why does the school resources lack in these communities? We need to stop and have real conversation on real topics. While it might not be comfortable, that's the only way we continue to move the needle. We have to start thinking about what is driving this mass incarceration, what is driving the systematic racism still persists itself in our community, especially when we call Westchester our home, right? I'm sorry you ladies live in Nyack, but we're Westchester here. In Westchester, we have a progressive county exec, right? We need to start having these conversations on racial inequity. We need to start having these conversations on social injustice, right? And as we talk about policing reform, criminal justice reform, what does that look like? Because I can tell you that the Rye Police Department looks totally different from what it looks like in Yonkers, right? If we were to have real conversation, when they're patrolling Slow Bombs projects versus the Rye Main Street, it looks totally different. And a Black guy in Rye with a do-rag on looks totally different than it looks in Yonkers or Mount Vernon. We have to stop and have those real conversations. And I think that I'm so, while there's this whole spectrum of emotions I'm going through, because what is happening, it just heightens how you feel. And you're so hyper, sensitive or hyper. I'm just so glad, and I'm going to say this, but as a Black woman talking to all of you as white people, trying to understand where you play a part in this, how you can help change the narrative. My heart is overjoyed because this is only, if we can touch one or two people to say, how do we keep moving the needle here? How do we keep doing this? The first thing that you did was had a conversation with Black people. And I'm that person. And I would say this is where we need to continue having that conversation, because we can only move the needle until we have a better understanding of each other, right? We can't do that if I don't know what you're going through and you don't know what I'm going through. We can't do anything from that. So the fact that we're just having this conversation, it's candid, it's open, it's uncomfortable, but we're having it. That's where we start. Then we start to act on our politicians and locally and doing all those things. But I would say from this conversation, we get more people involved. We need to diversify this. So when we open this, there's 100 people on. There's about 50 that look like me, 50 that look like you, and we just keep going, because that's where this conversation has to happen. It has to keep growing, because then when we continue to have these conversations and we understand the root causes of these issues, then we can find solutions. But right now we can't talk solutions until we really start taking a deeper dive. That's me. Sorry.
Thank you.
So many times I wanted to say amen like I was in church. I really wanted to get up and start shouting. I'm sorry.
You're looking at Sherry.
Thank you for that.
I know, Sherry, I see you, but I really do. I mean, there's so much work to be done here. And you know, I have to tell you, I grew up in Peekskill, but I actually went to school at Hendrick Hudson. I was one of 2 Black people that graduated from my class. So when I went to college, for me, I had to go find my culture. I went to a historically Black college and university because I felt I got lost. I was trying to be something that I wasn't because I was put in a box. And so for me, I felt like I had to go find Joanne and find my inner Black girl magic. I'm just going to share that with you because it's so tough. And a lot of times we as parents, we need to start also talking to our children about race, even though our children are colorblind, because our children are so infused by the media, by our iPads, by technology, by all these things. Just when I watched I couldn't get myself to watch the George Floyd video. But when the CNN special came on, I was watching it and I was making all these commentaries. My 6-year-old son was standing next to me and he said, "Mom, but why are you doing that?" Because the police are here to protect us. And I cried because I'm getting emotional now because I didn't know how to tell my son that you might be a threat because you're a Black man. I didn't know how to do that. And I even said to my son, my husband, when that finished, I said, we're going to have a tough conversation tomorrow with Jalen. And it's something that I'm not prepared for. I don't even know how to do it. But we had to, because he had to understand that there was this potential threat of him, that he couldn't wear red, or he couldn't have a do-rag, or he couldn't do certain things. It's a conversation that we have to continue. We have to continue. And I appreciate all of you for taking your time on a Thursday night to really just be here with us. I hope that we continue this. I hope that you come and learn about the youth shelter, learn about our young people, that we're trying to empower them to have a voice, because they're the voice of many unspeaking people. And yes, you know what? Criminal does not define them. They have a criminal history, but that is not their path. And so I encourage you to come and learn about our young people.
Please do. They're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. They're the most brilliant minds you will find. They are articulate. They have things to say. You only have to ask them how they feel, and they will be open to share. Don't be intimidated by the way people portray teens and youth in the media, because they definitely are the future. And if you take a moment to learn from them, it might impact your life in the way that you see it totally.
Of course.
They've been through so much, and they've dealt with things that you've probably never even seen in a lifetime.
Of course.
I don't think I would be able to withstand half of the things and the journeys that they've been on.
Of course.
But you have to take a moment to just break down those barriers, and not even Black and brown, just having conversations with youth in general. Mm-hmm. They definitely have more to say and more to share. And I tell them all the time, you know, infamously, I say, I can't stand adults, because they just want to tell you what to do, and they just want to just impose their opinion, and you never have a place to share that. If you just take a moment and just ask, Randy, how are you feeling today? Help me understand, you know, how you're going through this time. We're dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with just pandemic, systemic racism, oppression, all these things. But the only difference with Black and brown people is the pandemic is what's new to us. Everything else was always there. Mm-hmm. So if you feel this overwhelming sense of just, I don't know what is happening, imagine living in Black and brown skin.
And communities.
Because the only thing that has happened for us is that the pandemic has happened. And I mean, you know, in our culture, listen, you have to wash your hands when you walk in, take your shoes off at the door. So all of the strategies for the pandemic, we had those in place. That wasn't even the worry.
Yeah, but the pandemic has showed the health inadequacies in Black and brown communities. Because if you look at COVID-19 and what is reared its head in regards to the folks that have died, or have the communities that have had pockets of COVID-19, it is in Black and brown communities. You know why? Because there's a neighborhood health, there isn't a real healthcare system there to really help these folks. So COVID-19 exposed a lot more of the healthcare disparities in different communities as well.
Yeah, and the way that we're all treated and whatnot. But
we could go on, guys.
Yes,
cut
we
us
could.
off.
You know, you can, definitely you
off.
can cut us off. But like I say, to live in our skin, we have a lot to say and a lot to do. But if you feel oppressed and the anxiousness and really wanting to make a call to action, imagine how we feel every single day, minus the pandemic. I mean, that's just how it is, and we can't continue on like this. And I'm so appreciative to be a part of, as I said, an impromptu conversation for me. I'm just thrilled to be on, and I hope that we're able to continue this. I'm really charged by this. I really am.
Joanne, did you, and I apologize, I was a few minutes late getting on. Did you talk to them about the connection between Rye and like the start of the youth shelter?
We didn't even get there.
There's some like good news here. I mean, a little bit that we, there, and I see Debbie Zing on as well. And
hi, Debbie. She brought us mass. Hi, Debbie. I have to tell you, you might know more historical context than me. I've been at the shelter now since about February, and while I was getting my feet planted, we had life just go in uproar. But I would say since I've been here, I've learned so much about our relationship in Rye, particularly with the Rye Presbyterian Church. The Rye Presbyterian Church, Debbie, amazing people, Mary Ann, who has been great with us, not only just helping us, when COVID-19 hit us, we as a shelter were just not even prepared for, like, how do we go virtual? We don't even have the technology. Like, what do you mean? Mary Ann, we wrote this crazy proposal to the Rye Presbyterian Church, and they actually funded us to go virtual with supporting our technology. And so we're extremely grateful. And then I got this crazy phone call. It said, wait a minute, how are you guys adjusting with PPE? And I said, we can't find it. We couldn't find PPE, but yet it was required because we're an essential shop. And the Rye Presbyterian Church jumped in right there. Debbie came personally in her car, dropped off the mask with her mask in tow.
Thanks,
and we were just so appreciative. And I think the Reverend John Paul, is that also? Yes, Reverend John Paul. Even before this, we were supposed to have, the church has always done groups with us. And so we're excited. I am excited to continue learning about the relationship of the youth shelter and the Rye community. And I am even excited even more from this conversation to make sure that we keep this dialogue happening, not between just all of you, but your families, your children, just everyone, because I think the more that we are educated and the more that we're in quote unquote pain and discomfort, it will call us to act. And so I'm excited about this conversation being the first of many as we move forward. And Catherine, if I miss anything, you might know more than I do.
So let me try to link a few things that we've touched on to home, all
Good.
Of our homes. So Ann Spaeth, who maybe only a couple of you know who that is. She's an older woman. She's now probably in her mid-80s. She was one of the founders of the youth shelter, and she lives here in Rye and recognized that incarceration was part of this systemic racism. She has a wonderful history, and I won't take up a whole lot of time talking about Ann and the work that she's done, but it is a wonderful story that at some point we really should hear that. But so we have pockets of people along the way that stood up and said, we see what's going on here. The Rye Presbyterian Church, to its credit, also through its ministry and some of the things that they've done, recognized again that what the youth shelter was doing was getting to sort of the underlying issues that are really based in racism. And that's why they said, we want to be partners with the youth shelter and help, give people an opportunity for life as opposed to incarceration, which stops everything in its tracks.
Especially young people.
And just one little fun fact that I'll throw in. So we talked about D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation, and Sherry correct me if I'm wrong, did not D.W. Griffith live in Greenhaven in Rye? Is that not when the birth of Rye Hollywood in the 1920s? Was he not part of that? Because I have this memory that he was a resident, and if you look at the history of that movie and what he was doing in the Sound Shore, it looks like he was here.
I think he did live in a house somewhere in there, and I'd have to go back and look at one of our tours where we did all of that. There was a Greenhaven, when it was developed primarily by Broadway producers and Hollywood producers and people in the industry. And yeah, I think he was one of them.
That would be another great story for us to look into.
It's kind of incredible.
Yeah.
Very incredible that here we are today. But I don't want to take over all of this because I think you're all doing an amazing job. But I do want to add one thing that we haven't touched on, because we are talking local, but we're not talking what I always see is like home, our home. And I think our children are like sponges, you know, they suck it all up. And if we are not having, if our dinner parties look very monochromatic, that's the problem. Like, we really have to start looking what we're doing right at home. And I will leave it at that for now.
Actually, one of the things that we promised we would do is a hard stop. So, I mean, I'm sure some of us can stay on if anybody wants to hang out, but I do want to wrap something up just by asking if everybody could either share here out loud or in the chat box. I hear everybody asking for the plea to keep going. So what's one thing, or more than one thing, that you can commit to right now today to keep going? You can either share here with us or in the chat box, but I hope before we all hang up that we can promise ourselves and each other to commit to one thing to keep this important conversation and this important work moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm going to start, and I'm going to say the one thing that I have been saying, my quote for a while, is that I'm rooting for everyone that is Black, and that is from, right? So that is the one thing that I will be doing, and I will be continuing to doing my activism and work around Black and brown people and the unjust that we face. Check. How about that? So the next person can go.
One thing I'm working on doing is listening and learning, just listening better to other people when they share their stories.
Something that I will commit to and I continue to do is to make myself and other people uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I have a voice, and I'm not going to stop using it. My go-to is no, I won't shut up. And if you don't like it, too bad. But I commit to keep on the hard conversations even as they get harder.
So I work with Sandy with a youth group in the school, and I work with many others in this group actually, and in collaborative efforts. And one of the things that we're really trying to commit to is to provide more opportunities for authentic, because we recognize that our community is not as diverse as some of us might like, to make sure that we are looking actively for ways for our students to have leadership opportunities, co-leadership opportunities with young people of color in other communities and in our own community, obviously in our own community. But because there's not as much of it as we would like, making sure that we actively make opportunities for our kids to work side by side on these issues with other youth, and particularly youth of color. So I commit to that. I've been committed to it, but I continue to commit to it actively.
I commit to follow up with the superintendent who is creating a committee to try to address what the Rye alumni students courageously spoke about and their experience of being a small group and how the education system is handled. And so just to kind of be accountable to what are we going to do, and checking in so that it's not a group that goes underground.
What the film brought to the surface for me is that there's so much that I don't know. So in the short term or the immediate, I commit to doing as much reading, as much listening, as much asking, as much watching as I possibly can. So when I go back to the schools in September, I am armed with more knowledge that I am woefully missing in my own education experiences, and all of the above. So, and obviously continuing to work with our students, our administration, with Nancy, and all of the work that we do. So, and I won't shut up.
I commit to amplifying the Black voices in our community and making sure that when we have these discussions, everybody is present and that everybody has a voice, and that these hard discussions are going to happen at home and within our community. So that's my commitment.
Absolutely. I put our commitment here. We are, it's not only amplifying the voice of the Black community, but I think also amplifying the voice of people who, quote unquote, like Nikki said, are those criminals. We want to help educate the community on not only race, but also criminal justice. I don't even know what to call it, the oppressive system, all of those things that we want to continue to talk about, especially when we talk about young people under 21, right? These are still babies in my eyes that are here that we're helping to, change and transform their lives. So I would love to, and I'm speaking for me and Jordan, if it's individually, collectively, the more that we have a conversation, the more that you just learn about, quote unquote, what it means to be Black in America. You can ask me that. I mean, we would be really open to having those rough conversations or those uncomfortable conversations. And I would say here is because there's at least, we're building a relationship. And when we build a relationship, there's that trust that we start to gain. You can't go ask just a normal Black person, how do you feel today, right? So I think here is where we're starting to drive a relationship. And so as we drive that, I want us to build that trust that we can start to ask the uncomfortable questions of each other. And so I put us out there as the youth shelter to be that voice that you all need, and to be a voice, and us to be a listener to where you all want us to help amplify your voice or help change the narrative. And so that's what we here at the youth shelter, we want to put out there as to continue moving the needle here.
I so appreciate that, Joanne, and Jordan and Kristy and Nikki, all of you just serving as just helping to engage our community in this conversation and helping us do this important work. And we are committed. This is the first of this type of conversation. And the goal was to use the movie as a sort of macro view to help with some of that learning. I know Sandy mentioned the historical context. And I think for many of us in the last couple of months, this historical context and all that we missed in our history classes has become very clear. And then inviting you all to help us with the conversation helped us bring it home and see what actionable decisions and choices and conversations we can have to change how our community really has these discussions. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining us, and a huge thanks to Chris from the library and to our facilitators, Nikki and Kristy, and Joanne and Jordan, for just helping make this conversation happen and helping make it meaningful. It's the beginning, like I said, of what we hope will be many community-wide discussions on systemic racism and social justice. And we have a lot to learn and a lot to do, and having conversations and making these real connections is the first step. At the Rye Historical Society, we're working to develop more educational programs, and Chris gave some of the resources from the library. And I also want to mention, because not everyone knows this, but RYE has a Human Rights Commission, and their mission is to support people in our community when there are instances of discrimination. So we need to be amplifying all the work that we have going on in our community and make everyone more aware of what can be done in RYE, from the schools to the city council to the police reform to all the institutions that exist in our community. And by committing to doing this work throughout our community, I think we can make a real change. And so thank you all for being here tonight. It's really been wonderful to learn from all of you. Does anyone else have anything to wrap up? Or I know that some people were sharing information, and I'm happy to put together a follow-up that we can send out to participants about some of the resources and different things that we touched on, so that this is really just a jumping off point.
Can I just recommend something for people to take, is the Undoing Racism workshop that is ran through the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. It definitely hits a lot of things. It's definitely an eye-opener. I know it was an eye-opener for me. In our county volunteer counseling services, they host a lot of those workshops. And I'm not sure if they're going to be doing it on Zoom or how they're going to be doing it. But if you leave your email, I can certainly put you guys on the email list. We do have these conversations twice a month, one in the morning and one in the evening. Monday evening is the fourth Monday of the month, and Wednesday, the second Wednesday of the month is the morning session. But if you'd like to leave your email, I could certainly put you on the mailing list, because I think this conversation does need to continue. We can't just be a one and done, just having the conversation just after watching the 13th. The conversation has to be ongoing, just like Joanne said. So yeah, thank you. And I thank you for the space. Thank you for having us here, Kristy and myself. I'm not gonna speak for Kristy, but thank you for having me here. I totally appreciate that. And thank you, Joanne and Jordan. You guys are dope. And you left your cell phone number. That was the wrong thing to do to me.
Catherine knows, she called me. My signal was terrible, but we talked 3 times in one day. So it works.
Yeah, Joanne, for the short amount of time that Joanne has been leading the youth shelter, we certainly have had some conversations.
Absolutely.
So.
And I enjoy it, and I want to continue them.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you were a part of this conversation. I think it brought it home for so many of us. And, I think there's more that we need to hear in addition from the underlying roots. And
yes, the drivers.
Yep. I've been talking about that too.
Yep.
Well, one takeaway I had from the film, if it had been made today, it would have been twice as long. So much has happened. I mean, the way this COVID, everything has just come together in the last few months. I just feel like the energy, the conversations, all of that have just pushed everything to the forefront in a way that makes this work really important. So I appreciate just how much this is a learning process, and where we are right at this moment. It's an opportunity, and so thank you.
I just wanted to add, Joanne, it's nice to see you. I know we spoke on the phone. So, and sort of, I wear 2 hats with RYE Historical, and then I'm also very involved with the RYE Press Women's Association. And a couple years ago, we had visited the youth shelter, and I just wanted to encourage everyone to reach out to Joanne and have a conversation, go out and visit, and listen to the stories, and if possible, meet some of these boys if possible, because the work that they do is really incredible, and they're saving lives. So just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you, Joanne and Jordan.
And that's a good point. And right now we're, because of the pandemic, I think it's a little difficult, but at some stage, as county legislator, I would be happy to, with coordination with Joanne, if we could figure out, again, doing it safely for everybody. How do we get people to hear and see what the good things that you're doing. And again, it's an incredible program. And honestly, my biggest disappointment when New York State passed criminal justice reform was that it didn't allow for programs like the youth shelter to be replicated throughout New York State. That's how good it is.
We're the only one of its kind.
Yeah.
Really crazy.
Yeah.
But I think that we have a space now, even in all this darkness that has happened, with the new policing reform and the criminal justice reforms that are legislation that is to come. There might be a space for advocacy here where I think that we're going to get on our soapbox and really get on it. So even with the county exec doing this now, task force, I've already sent a bug like, why am I not on there? Like, because I think there's a space for us to really play, especially when we talk about youthful offenders, juvenile justice, and we talk about criminal justice reform. You got to start with the intervention being young people, and there needs to be a space for us to be at that table. So
I agree with you. I will follow up on this tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, you cut us off whenever you're ready. I've truly enjoyed this conversation. I just want to say to all of you, I've truly enjoyed it. I'm getting like all these separate little inbox messages. I know, and you can call me, please text me. I'm trying to take pictures of people's cell phone numbers. So Allison, it would be great if you could send a recap and just, everyone's contact information would be very helpful.
We will do that. And I mean, it's just been really wonderful for me, even as a community member, to place faces with names of some people in our community. And I think if there were 30 of us here tonight, and then, next time, hopefully we,
of course,
a couple more people in, and I'm happy for this to really be almost an introduction, and we'll get everyone who participated on an email list, and we can share the Undoing Racism workshops, organize a visit to the youth shelter, get some real work up and running, and make it something very sustainable. That was my commitment to someone who I talked to this program about, is this, this has to be sustainable. We have to look at this as a long-term goal, or we're never going to get the change accomplished that we're hoping to see. So
agreed.
Society does.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure meeting you virtually. Amanda, thank you for having your children on this. I really, truly appreciated that. Kudos to you. Hi, young man. Hi, young scholar. Oh, I saw another child.
Yes.
Oh, Dan. I think Dan had it. Yes.
There.
Hi, Calvin and Wyatt.
Oh, and there's the cat.
And a cat.
Bye, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.